Welcome to Stories with Traction, unedited and unfiltered. These are real conversations with leaders who have walked through trials and triumph. In a world of AI-polished sound bites and scripted perfection, this podcast isn't about being flawless. It's about being purposeful. I'm your host, Matt Zahn. We're going to find out what drives these leaders, what's their story, and how can we learn from their experiences. Get inspired and enjoy Stories with Traction. Ryan, welcome to the Stories with Traction podcast.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
I'm excited to have you. I appreciate your time. I know you're incredibly busy, so thank you so much for spending time with us today. I want to jump right into what you do from a recruiting perspective, what you do for your clients. So if you were to lay out what you tend to do on a day-to-day basis for your clients, what would that be?
Yeah, for our clients, I mean, it's really simple. And that's been one of the big things that we've had at the forefront of this company is like, just keep it simple. And so we're expert sales recruiting, and we do that on a flat monthly rate. So our whole thing here was looking at the industry, like we felt it was pretty broken. And a big part of that is the model of recruiting. And so when you think about success fees and everything else, it changes the dynamic of the relationship. And so we just kind of carved out this amazing niche. Sales recruiting is the hardest, and so we were like, we're gonna go after it. And we just developed this unique model just to make it, better for everybody.
Yeah, I really appreciate you mentioning keep it simple, right? That's so important. And a lot of times I think people confuse simple with easy, right? So it's simple to bench 400 pounds. It's not easy, right? So, but I think that's important to stress because I think sometimes we lean so far into complexity that it really messes us up in business. And one of my favorite football stories is of Vince Lombardi when his team would lose, he would take them into the locker room and he'd hold up a football and say, "Gentlemen, this is a football." And then they would dive into the simplistic plays that they would run, properly executed, that would cause them to win games. And isn't it funny that a lot of businesses add so much complexity to the recruiting process that they tie themselves into knots and it ends up really hurting their business? So with that said, are there some things that you've seen in the industry that some organizations do that are hurting them from a complexity perspective? And if so, what would one of those things be?
Yeah, most of the time when I was on a call with somebody yesterday, and she was just looking for feedback on her company and some different things, and I was like, "Well, what do you do? What's kind of your core product or core service?" And she rattled off 5 different things, and my thing to her was like, all of those are incredible ideas, and I think to a certain extent, it's okay to have more than one offering, more than one service. But there should be an easy way to like move people up the value ladder. And so for us, like, do we have other services? Yeah, like we can find anybody anywhere. Sales recruiting is the hardest. It's also for us, it's the easiest kind of uh, department to sell into because people are always looking for incredible salespeople, and the sales divisions generally have a lot of authority and influence inside of organizations, and so they are the decision makers. So for us, like our sell-in is through the sales channel. But that said, because we can find anybody anywhere, once we're in, like what else do we do? We can find operations, HR, accountants. We do staffing. So we have a lot of different offerings. If you go to our website and as you hear me talk today, all you're going to think about is we're expert sales recruiters. And I think it's just so important to have like one core offering, because anything else, and you just kind of start to dilute that message.
So you mentioned easy way to move people up the profit ladder. So I want to talk a little bit more about that. So this is many, many years ago. I actually went to, for people that are familiar, Russell Brunson's ClickFunnels headquarters. And there's a lot to be said about that technology. So that's not the premise of my question. But there is something to be said about the philosophy of taking people through a process, right? Getting them to say yes here, and then they say yes, and then they continue to say yes, and really putting them through a really well thought out, strategic, intentional funnel. So I want you to expand on that point about moving people through the profit ladder. And if I'm sure there's some people listening that they might not have ever heard that terminology before. What would be some of the places that they could start to wrap their brains around implementing that in their company?
Well, hopefully this example is relevant because it gets back to what you just talked about there, which is the micro commitments. So my last company was a company called Hunt a Killer, and it was an immersive murder mystery experience. We started off by selling subscription boxes, and as people went to our website, you couldn't even make a purchase on the website. The only thing you could do on the website once you landed on the landing page is fill out an application. And the whole thing was if we can get people to go through a type form, one, we can communicate our value proposition through the type form. Hey, have you ever wanted to, hunt down a serial killer? Hey, does it sound cool to have a box of clues, items, correspondence? And we're getting them to say yes every single time through that type form until we get to the end. And then we say, we'll get back to you. We're going to review your application. We'll get back to you if you're in. That's a small example of kind of micro commitments and getting people starting to say yes. And there's a lot of psychology behind that. To the point of the value ladder, at that point, it's how I think about this, whether it's consumer products or whether it's business services or any product. It is what is the easiest way to get through the door. For Hunt a Killer, it was a $30 product. For us, it's a monthly flat monthly rate expert recruiting. And for us, it's going through the sales channel. It's the easiest place to get yeses. And then once you're in, like it's not about diluting. Like for us, it's all about listening. So for us, it's like if we hear that there's other recruiting needs, if we hear that there's staffing needs, and it's a competency or a service that we provide, we just simply lean in with a, hey, did you know? Did you know we also do that? Did you know we also do this? And it was the same way in consumer. So like we wouldn't start hitting people over the head with other offerings until they had already been a subscriber for 3 months. But once they hit that 3 months, what we knew is that they were more apt at that point to make a larger purchase with us. So it was at that 3 month mark that we started sending more emails of like, hey, do you know we have this like $300 premium experience? But for us, it's just about like, how do you get the yeses? How do you get through the door? And then you start walking them through. You start walking them up the value ladder of other services that you provide, which may be higher price point, which may be a little bit more sticky. So for us, for instance, like we're really good at what we do. And that's also to a detriment. So if our whole thing is lifetime value, but we're finding amazing salespeople within that first month, well, then most of our clients are putting us on pause. But what we've done is we've established credibility. We now have a positive relationship, and we can go in with some of our stickier services or with some of the other things that we do that might be a little bit higher on the value ladder.
Yeah, appreciate you mentioned that. I do want to focus in on something that you said. You had said, so people on the website, and at the end, fill out this form and we'll get back to you. That almost sounds like scarcity to me. That almost feels like if I was someone entering that in, and I got that message back, I would be like, oh, man, I really hope that they get back to me. Like and almost like so is there something said on creating scarcity as it pertains to any service that a business would do? And if so, what would that look like?
Yes, and it's easier with some businesses than others. Scarcity is a huge selling tactic, and so you're absolutely right. One of the things on the front of the Hunt Killer website is we only accepted 100 applications a day, and so right before they even went into the type form to start filling out their application, they already knew that there was only so many applications that were approved each day. So for consumer, sometimes it can be a little easier. For business services, what I've realized over the last several years is it's got to be authentic. Like on the consumer side, you kind of have a fudge factor in there where you can like you've got so much traffic going and you can kind of play with it and you can test things. On the business side, if you're just like, hey, like we're booked up for the next month. One, it sounds inauthentic, and two, in business, it's all about speed. And so, especially in recruiting, like people don't generally go to recruiters because they've got a need in 3 months. They generally go because they've been searching for this for the last 3 months. And so, what they care about is how quickly can you get started. And we've naturally weaved in scarcity authentically into Talent Harbor. And the reason for that is right now we can only onboard 3 to 4 clients effectively each week. And so if we are at that point, it's not like a juke or a fake or a script. Like we give them the next available. And so when we say, hey, we're booked up for this week, we've got, several clients that we're onboarding. Our next available time is next Tuesday. We have found that just by communicating that truth, that authenticity, it's increased our conversion rate.
Yeah, I appreciate you mentioning that because there's so many. I've heard so many pitches before where you're right, it's not authentic, and you feel weird. You're like, there's no way that what you're saying is true, and then trust is immediately frayed. You don't want to do business with the person that's talking to you. You don't want to do business with the company at all. It's just not good for anyone. So I really do appreciate you mentioning that. I do want to switch gears and I want to focus on AI for a moment because everyone's talking about AI. Obviously, it's here today. It'll be here tomorrow. Where do you see, let's just say in the next couple of years, where do you see AI technology changing the recruiting industry? And what should people listening to this episode be aware of?
Yeah, I think two things. That the one, everything that people are reading right now in the media, all of the talk tracks, all of the keynote speakers that are in the AI space, they're not just trying to sell you, they're trying to sell their investors. And so there's a lot of like fear mongering and like jobs are going away. That's not where I sit on this position. That's not where many of my peers sit on this position. As an example to that, Perplexity CEO came out maybe a while back, a few months ago, and he was basically like, "Hey, recruiter jobs are going away within the next 6 months." And then I went to the Perplexity's LinkedIn page, and they were hiring for like 6 recruiters, and so it's all just bull crap. And basically, what the consumer is seeing right now, or what the general public is seeing right now, is the same pitches that usually happen behind closed doors, where you're just pitching the moon. That's happening in the public ecosystem right now. So, first, like, will it have impacts? Yes. And I think those impacts are positive. So when you think about how do you ensure that you're hiring the right person? What type of assessments can somebody take? There's a whole bunch of amazing things that can enhance and improve the probability that you're hiring the right person. At the end of the day, though, people have to understand that recruiting is a relationship game. Recruiting is not just like, oh, just finding someone off the street and they just magically say yes. Like recruiting is building a relationship, understanding what are the goals, objectives of both parties, what are the interests, making sure that those align ahead of time, and then going down that path. So to think that some sort of robot is going to build a relationship and you're going to be able to find, rock stars, A plus talent, that's it's not changing like that.
Could it help in the interview process, though? Imagine a world where instead of the first interview being with a human, someone would go on to, let's say, a Zoom or a Teams type platform, and the AI would study their eye movements when they respond to a certain question to try to gauge, are they lying, are they embellishing, their gestures, the certain words that they're using, and then basically take all that data and and basically kick it back to potentially the next round of interviews would be a human based on who would get through that round. Is that even a possibility? Would there potentially be potential lawsuits with doing something like that across the country? And then certain regulations come into play. Like I know there's a lot of things being talked about. Do you see a lot of differences with potentially the interview process as it pertains to AI in the future?
Yes, and I think that's where we'll get some of the enhancements. But there's a big caveat there. The things that you're talking about are already happening. My son applied to Chipotle a couple months ago, and his first interview with Chipotle was like on some sort of video and answering a questionnaire. When you think about frontline workers, when you think about jobs that are um, uh, in kind of in very high demand, that can be a process that can be implemented to help kind of weed through the applicants that are coming in. What I will say to that is that's not real recruiting. Like if we were the type of talent that most leaders should dream about bringing into their organization, when you put up an obstacle and you say, "Hey, uh, I value your time, but here, talk to this robot first." how many of those A players are going to talk to a robot? And that's where I think this comes in. So for instance, like everything you just said, 100% true. I bet you within 2 to 3 years, and there's a couple platforms that exist. We don't use them for this, but there's platforms that you can layer into the interview process where a human's asking questions and you're getting an analysis that's happening based upon, some of those things that you already talked about. But at the end of the day, I think it's great for assessing. I don't think it's great for relationship building. And if you want the rock stars are they're when you say, "Hey, go do this," they're going to say, I'm going down the street to another one."
Yeah, no, what everything you said, it makes complete sense. And you would hope that trust would be built right away, right? And there might be, again, that fraying of trust if you have an exceptional candidate and they're having to jump through hoops. It doesn't really lead someone to believe that there's a vibrant, great company culture based on that blockade. So I do appreciate you mentioning that. I
Yeah.
want to talk about I want to backtrack. I want to talk more about your story, your background, how you were able to get to the position, the level you are today. What positioned you as the leader you are. So I want to go back to your teen years. I think there's a lot that can be learned by individuals' teen years. I think it's really important. It's just based on activities, whether it's sports or extracurricular activities. So if I were to ask teenage Ryan what he wanted to be or do or what he was into, what responses would I have gotten?
Yeah. I was the kid growing up that would read the books on like 100 different business ideas for teenagers. And so like me growing up, I was selling creepy crawler Bel Air Elementary. I was selling creepy crawlers in Mrs. Price's class until she shut me down. Getting into middle school, high school, it was about washing cars and um, mowing lawns, shoveling snow, anything I could do to kind of create value. And that's really where I started to understand business. The issue that I had is I wasn't very disciplined. So, I played on Bel Air High's soccer team, and I feel personally that I should have been first string keeper, but I was second string. And the coach gave me some good feedback at a certain point, and he was like, every time there's a game or something happening, like you're not watching the game, like you're turned around talking to somebody in the crowd. And so for me, like discipline, focus, all of those things that I think are necessary ingredients to being successful in anything, they didn't come until I joined the Navy. So, just kind of all over the place, sporadic. And then I won't say eventually found my calling. I think the calling eventually found me, but it was always kind of in the plans. So the two things that I wanted to be more than anything in the world was one, I wanted to fly jets off of aircraft carriers. I was a Top Gun generation. And so watching the movie, getting inspired. And I also love the movie Santa Claus. And so Tim Allen, watching him like do that brief and talk about business and marketing, I was like, I'm going to be like those people. And that was weirdly kind of the genesis.
Interesting. All right, so talk to me a little bit about the Navy. Where do you think, I know it's probably really tough to just because I'm sure that based on your experience in the Navy, there's so much of who you are as a person based on that. But where do you think you would be without that experience in the Navy? What would be missing right now if it wasn't for you being in the Navy?
Yeah, everything. Like, because like, eh, did I and do I have the energy? Do I have the passion? Do I have the grit? Do I have the tenacity? Like, all of those things are true. I think that's like who I am as a human. I think that's it's genuinely kind of a part of my being. Without the Navy, I wouldn't have known how to channel it. And it didn't happen out of the gate. So I was a troublemaker. Like it started off as a class clown, and then it escalated into getting into other sorts of trouble. And it didn't stop when I joined the Navy. So I lost my job. I was in the street racing. I blew my car up on nitrous. We were racing down Northern Parkway. We were one of those kids, um, so I lost my job. I was in the IBEW 37 or whatever the electrical union is in Baltimore. Blew up my car, couldn't get to work anymore. So then I was just sitting there. And my mom was like, "Well, you're not staying here, so go join the Navy." So eventually joined the Navy. But for the first year, like I was still a troublemaker. And it took really good leadership and influence of those that were above me to help me kind of see the light and guide me down. And it got into some trouble in the Navy, and a commanding officer took a bet on me, and it's one of the reasons that I'm still in the Navy today, 23 years later, in the reserves. But 23 years later, it's because somebody took a card on me, like someone showed me the light, and if I can have that type of impact on someone else, like I feel like that's a part of my calling. So it's one of the reasons that I still serve.
Wow. Well, thank you for your service. Appreciate
Thanks.
it. Incredible. From a recruiting perspective, if a hiring manager is aware that the job candidate has military service, are there any particular questions that you would recommend that person ask?
Hmm. Yeah, I would probably want to get an idea of like, so there's a couple things that become like crystal clear and true. Generally speaking, veterans and people with military backgrounds, like they understand how to persevere. I think one of the biggest life skills anybody can have is resilience. And how is resilience built? It's built through failure. And it's really interesting because in the Navy, in any of the forces, I think the civilian population looks at this and they're experts at their craft. Like they're perfect with everything they do. And that's all true. It's only true because they spent so much time failing. What civilians most of the time don't see is all the training that's happening, because you'll see that one moment where the balloon flies and we're called upon, but day in and day out, military members are training. And that training consists of failure, because like you train, you fail, you learn, you improve, and you continue moving on. And it's through that loop is where resilience is built, because it's the adversity that you're facing and being able to persevere. So I guess the short answer here is like one thing that's most likely true with military candidates is they've got a sense of resilience. What I'd probably want to know is how was that resilience built? Like what type of training was conducted? Like what type of lessons learned that they have while going through the training? Because just because there's resiliency doesn't mean there's self-awareness. And so one of the things I would really be looking for is like, is this candidate self-aware enough to know like how they learned, where they learned, and being able to kind of translate that into the civilian world?
Wow, that's such a good response. I appreciate you sharing all that. Yeah, it's so true, right? There's resilience piece, but need to be self-aware. Absolutely. Now, you did mention about that resilience came from failure, right? To
Yeah.
reach that level of excellence or even perfection, it's a ton of failure. The problem is a lot of businesses don't have the stomach or the financial resources for that level of failure, right? So if you were to advise a company that wants to be exceptional, right? They want the best product or the best service, and clearly they need to fail like crazy. At what point would they step back and say, this just isn't worth it, or should we keep going? Where's the balancing act? What kind of recommendations would you give regarding that failure rate?
Yeah, I think that's a like first that's an inward look at whoever the ultimate leader, the ultimate decision maker, the ultimate owner is of that organization. And the reason that's more inward is because it's about risk tolerance. And so whether a company wants to admit it or not, like they're failing every single day. It's just how big are their failures. And the bigger the risk, the bigger the failures, but it's really understanding first, like where does the owner want to take that enterprise or that organization, because that's going to dictate the level of risk that they're willing to tolerate along the path. As a for instance, like my, I suffered many failures. Hunt to Killer was ultimately a success story, and we sold it last year. And that's cool, and that's what the press talks about. What people don't talk about, or well, they talked about it in the moment. But I used to have this company called Run for Your Lives, and it was the first ever zombie infested 5K obstacle course race. So it was in Darlington, Maryland, was our first event. We wound up scaling it to 13 different cities in 2013, and then we shot for 27 cities or that was 2012, and then we went for 27 cities next year. We ultimately bankrupted. But like my risk tolerance is very, very high. And it's just my general like philosophy on life and money, and like money comes, money goes, and it is what it is. But yeah, I don't know if that's a great answer, but it's hard to assess because it all comes down to the risk tolerances. But organizations, like you have to fail to learn. And if you're not failing, you're not learning, then you're not growing.
So let's talk about that statement, money comes, money goes, because not everyone thinks that way. Even some of the most successful, there are some incredible business leaders that have made substantial money that wouldn't say money comes, money goes. They try to protect their money at all costs. They don't want to go bankrupt. The thought of that causes great anxiety in them. And I think a lot of that's based on their early childhood, right? If they were raised in incredibly poor circumstances and they build massive organizations and now they have the financial resources to back it up, they would never dream of going back to that lifestyle. Why do you think you are that way? Why do you think that you have so much risk tolerance? Why do you think that you would make a comment, money comes, money goes? What prompted you to think that way?
I, I have this conversation, believe it or not, with my mom quite a bit. Because we didn't grow up rich. I mean, back then it was probably lower middle. We lived in some townhomes, very, very modest. Um, my mom, single working mom, so I was a latchkey kid, come home, get off the bus, go home. Things were certainly not given to me. So it's hard for me to understand where this mindset or philosophy comes from. And it might just be how I'm wired, but like I don't care. Like maybe it's just and I'm not cocky, but I do have a lot of self-belief, meaning like I can accomplish anything that I want to accomplish. And like I went bust. And by the way, this probably took some learning as well. And that's probably a part of the journey. So when I'm not immune to it. So yeah. When Hunt to Killer bankrupted, that was brutal because I didn't know anything about business, hired all my best friends, couldn't spell P&L, just a whole bunch of things just went sideways. And it was like the worst moment of my life. And I was like, I'm never going to be able to get back here. And it was a couple of years later when the next company took off, which was Hunt to Killer. And what I realized is like where you're at is where you're at. I think of it as like a roller coaster. When a roller coaster is going up the track, and you hear that clicking. It's because there's a safety mechanism to make sure that if the chain breaks or something breaks, it doesn't slide backwards. And what I thought when Hunt to Killer went bankrupt is like I went backwards because I PG'd everything. So I went bankrupt as well, maintaining a TSSCI clearance with a bankruptcy. Like that's a whole nother podcast. Um, but it took the next company to realize that like, no, like my experience, my expertise, my knowledge, um, it just opens up your eyes. Like what Run for Your Lives taught me is like you can make $1 million. And like that was I probably didn't have that belief before then. What Hunt to Killer taught me was you can make $100 million. And like I didn't have that belief at the time. And now that like my mind's open to that type of stuff, it's like you just keep building. But that's not everybody's philosophy. And there's many successful people out there that like watch everything. And so it's just how I'm wired.
That's a phenomenal perspective on. I really appreciate that analogy of the roller coaster and the safety mechanism, right? We often in life, when something happens, often sometimes to us, and it's nothing that we did, it's out of our control. We think for whatever reason we're going to go backwards. But I really do appreciate that perspective from just the experience that you gain is extraordinary. Speaking of experience, I did want to ask you, based on your Navy experience, I'm guessing with being in the Navy comes great travel. I'm sure that you've been to many places, or a lot more places than the average person. I wanted to talk about different cultures for a moment. Um, was there something that was interesting to you? It could be anything, whether a certain U.S. state or maybe country that you were in, that you learned based on a certain culture to do something differently than what you were doing at the time. And if so, what would that be?
I think the biggest thing, and people that travel understand this, is like the perspective that you gain on like both the similarities and the differences. When I think about a lot of successful companies, there's quite a few that like start outside of the US and then somebody sees it. They're traveling, they're doing something like Red Bull. There's a classic case study in Red Bull where, it might have been Thailand, but he like traveled over there and it was this drink and he drank it. It gave him energy. He's like, oh, this is amazing. eventually all that stuff comes to the US and you can blow it up. And so like for me, one of the things that I find super interesting and fascinating is like one, like learning from different cultures, learning like what's working, what's not working. And so many times it like opens up your perspective to like, one, there's more than life, but two, there's things that are happening that are not in our bubble, that are incredible and incredible opportunities if you're a business person.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you mentioning that. And I really appreciate this conversation. I feel like you have offered a tremendous amount of wisdom, a lot of nuggets. There's three particular takeaways that after this conversation's over, months from now, even years from now, I'm going to remember. I really appreciate you stressing very early on in our conversation, what's the easiest way to get people through the profit ladder, right? The next rung of that profit ladder. I think that is so important. And I don't think enough companies think about that, right? How to gain interest, captivate their audience, and start the process. That's that buyer's journey, right? And even it might be an offering that isn't the most profitable, but if it's a way to get people in the door to the next thing, I think that's so important for sure, especially from a strategic perspective. The second thing you mentioned, which I think is really important, is we were talking about scarcity, and you were talking about how in B2B sales, we need to be authentic about that scarcity. It needs to be truthful in some way, shape, or form, right? And people that are listening to this episode, they know when someone has not been authentic as it pertains to scarcity. It really rubs people the wrong way, and it does not help with business in any way, shape, or form. So I think that was a really good point. And the third and final piece is that analogy that you mentioned of the roller coaster. I never thought about that before. You're going up a roller coaster and you hear those clicks. And it's to save you from sliding back down. And often in life, when we get hit or there's setbacks, we do think we're going backwards. But in reality, we have gained so much wisdom, so much experience. Could it potentially be to help launch us into something else? So I appreciate those 3 points. Thanks again. If anyone wants to get more information on what you do, they want to reach out to you for your services, where's the best place they can go to get that information?
Yeah, best place, just find me on LinkedIn. And it doesn't have to be like happy to jam on recruiting or anything else. But like I just love engaging with other entrepreneurs and like learning and sharing lessons and things like that. So if for any reason you just want to connect, it's just find me on LinkedIn. It's /Ryan E. Hogan, or just search Ryan Hogan and you'll see it up there.
Perfect. I'll include that in the show notes. People could just click and connect with you from there. Thanks again, Ryan. Really appreciate your time today.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you for listening to the Stories with Traction podcast. If you found this discussion helpful, please leave a review, since positive reviews help others find these conversations. New episodes drop regularly, so stay tuned. And remember, if you want to persuade with power and inspire those around you to take action, you must share more stories.